If you were pulled over tonight in Pittsburgh and suspected of a DUI, would you know what to do? I'm not talking about what you've heard. I'm not talking about what you've seen on TV or social media, but would you know what actually happens in that moment? What the officer is looking for and what your rights are, and what decisions could follow you for months or even years? Because the truth is, most DUI cases aren't decided by one big moment. They're shaped by a series of small decisions made under pressure on the side of the road. Welcome back to the Criminal Defense and Personal Injury Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Walker of Frank Walker Law. And today we're talking about one of the most common charges we see here in Allegheny County and all across Western Pennsylvania. That is the DUI charge, driving under the influence. And this is one of those situations where people think they understand how it works because they've seen social media, they've seen the movies, but they don't understand how it works until they're actually in it. Then everything feels different. So today I want to walk you through what actually happens from the moment you're pulled over to what comes next and where people tend to make mistakes. Up first, the traffic stop. Most DUI cases start the same way, with the traffic stop. Sometimes it's obvious. Speeding, swerving, bad registration, running a red light, reckless driving, careless driving. Other times it's something minor, something that wouldn't normally feel like a big deal. Once the officer approaches your vehicle, they're not just asking routine questions, they're observing. They're paying attention to everything. How you respond, how you look, how you appear, your disposition, whether or not your speech is clear, whether there's an odor of alcohol. Is it a faint smell, a medium smell, or a strong smell of alcohol? How you handle simple interactions. And this is where people often don't realize what's happening, because what feels like a casual conversation is actually part of an investigation. Even things like how quickly you answer, how slowly you answer. Do you avert your eyes? Are you nervous? Do you hesitate? What words you choose to answer? All of those can be noted and used against you later on. Next up are the field sobriety tests. If the officer suspects impairment, the next step is usually the field sobriety test. If there are roadside tests you've probably seen before, walking in a straight line, standing on one leg, the pin in front of your eyes, they call it the nystagmus test, following the object with your eyes, following that pin in front of your eyes, or following the finger in front of your eyes. What most people don't realize is that these tests are not as simple as they seem. They are designed to evaluate coordination, balance, and even attention. But they can also be affected by several factors: fatigue, anxiety, illness, other medical conditions, injury, or even uneven pavement or poor lighting. All those are factors that come into play when you're talking about field sobriety tests. And remember, you're doing all of this on the side of the road, often at night, with traffic passing by, and usually the glaring blue and red lights in your face. It's not exactly a controlled environment. So while these tests are presented as being straightforward, they're often more subjective than people expect. Next up, let's talk about the chemical testing. Because after the field sobriety test, there may be a request for chemical testing, either by breath, either a breath test or a blood test. In Pennsylvania, this is where things get more serious because there are specific thresholds for blood alcohol content, and the consequences increase depending on where that number falls. Generally, it breaks down into tiers: the lower BAC, the mid-range, and the high BAC. So you get the low tier, the middle tier, and the high tier. And with each level, the penalties increase, whether it be the penalties exposure to jail time, license suspension, or fines, or all three. It could be longer license suspension. It could be higher fines. The most severe consequences overall of those tiers, obviously, is the highest tier. There are also important rules around testing: what happens if you refuse the testing, and what your rights are, and how those decisions affect your case. This is one of those moments where people are making decisions very, very quickly without fully understanding the long-term consequences or the long-term impact it could have on their license. The biggest mistake I see: talking. If there's one thing that consistently causes problems in DUI cases, it's this. People talk too much, plain and simple. They try to explain. I only had a couple drinks. I'm fine to drive. I just live up the road. And it's completely understandable because you're trying to be cooperative. They're trying to resolve the situation. But what they don't realize is that those statements can become part of the case. I've handled DUI cases all across Allegheny County where what the person said during the stop, just a few sentences, becomes the most strongest evidence against them. Not because they intended to admit anything, but because those statements were interpreted in a certain way. And once they're documented, they don't go away. Let me give you an example of a real story. I work with someone who genuinely believed that they were okay to drive. They weren't trying to do anything wrong, but during the stop, they answered every question, explained where they had been, explained how much they had to drink and how they felt. From their perspective, they were being honest, they were being cooperative. From the prosecution's perspective, those statements help build the case, and that's the disconnect. What feels normal to you and I in a conversation at the moment can carry a lot more weight later on. Here's the key takeaway. The takeaway here isn't complicated, but it is important. DUI cases aren't just about whether someone was over the limit. They're about everything else that happens before, during, and after the stop. The observations, the tests, the statements. Each piece adds to the overall picture, and small decisions made quickly, under stress, can have lasting consequences. Not just in how the case unfolds, but in avoiding mistakes that are difficult to undo later. In the next episode, we're going to talk about something that connects directly to this, whether you should talk to police at all. Because that moment, when you're asked questions, whether it's during a traffic stop or after an arrest, is where a lot of cases are shaped. We'll break down what your rights are, how those interactions work, and what people often misunderstand. But until that episode, I want you to stay informed and I want you to stay safe. Take care.